Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this Economic Task Force Town Hall Zoom meeting. This is a special town hall meeting, the first half of which will be in conjunction with a press conference that we are holding with the media about the important information that was just released on the SBA loans that were part of the CARE Act. We also want to thank those who are joining on Facebook. I'm Derek Miller. I'm the president and CEO of the Salt Lake Chamber and Downtown Alliance, as well as the chair of the Utah Economic Response Task Force. The agenda today is packed. We're going to hear first from a panel of lenders on how small businesses can apply for an SBA loan. Well, that will be followed by Miles Hansen, who will share an update on the task force rapid response team of experts. And lastly, we will hear from Bill Crim from the United Way of Salt Lake, who is going to provide information on available 211 resources. As many of you know, the task force that was created by Governor Herbert 2.5 weeks ago is working hard to keep the economy vibrant, supporting businesses through a very challenging time. And we're excited today to be able to share details of a new program that are going to act as a game changer for our state. It's a new forgivable loan program under the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, that's the CARES Act, which was signed into law last week. It's designed to help organizations, including small businesses, nonprofits, and other entities that are affected by COVID-19. All of this to keep employees on the payroll and to cover basic business operating expenses. It is unprecedented, and it will be a lifeline to help protect paychecks to individuals, save small businesses, as well as support the economic health for Utah as we move together through this crisis. We're pleased to have a panel of the top financial minds in our state here to share with you some specifics about the Paycheck Protection Program. We will also discuss other provisions in the CARES Act and what they mean for us as consumers, as employees, and as business owners. We are joined today by Robert Spendlove, who is the senior economist from Zions Bank, Howard Headlee, who is the president of the Utah Bankers Association, Scott Simpson, who is president and CEO of the Utah Credit Union Association, as well as Scott Anderson, who is the president and CEO of Zions Bank. I'd like to first turn to Robert Spendlove, who's going to give us an overview of the CARES Act and what it means for our economy. Go ahead, Robert.
Thanks, Derek. It's great to be with you today. So what I'm going to do is just kind of give an overview of what we're seeing. Like Derek said, the bill was passed late last week. We're still getting guidance and more information from the federal government on the bill, but just kind of updating on what we're seeing and also why it's important and what the economic impact of the bill that we're seeing. So I'm just going to see if I can share my screen real quick. Let's see. So it says, just for the administrator, it says that the host has disabled screen sharing. Maybe if you could enable that for me. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that?
I can see it, Robert. You're good.
Great, thanks, Derek. Just a brief overview of what we're seeing in the current environment. We, just like Derek said, we are in an unprecedented era in our economy and in our state. When you typically think of when we experience an economic recession, they typically happen over several quarters. This downturn has come on us in the space of several weeks. It is dramatic and it is extreme. Just to give an example, just today, we got the new figures for unemployment insurance claims. Remember, last week, they were up 3.3 million. That has now jumped to 6.6 million unemployment insurance claims nationwide. To put that in perspective, the week previous to the 3.3 million was 211,000. An extreme jump in unemployment insurance claims. In Utah, we went from 1,314 2 weeks ago to 19,000, over 19,000 unemployment insurance claims. To today, it's up to over 28,000 unemployment insurance claims. At this current trajectory, the overall unemployment rate will exceed 10%. In fact, tomorrow is the monthly jobs report. I don't expect that we will see the full impact in the jobs report because this is coming on us so quickly and so dramatically. And one of the struggles that we're running into is just trying to be able to collect the information on what's happening with the economy, because it's changing so fast that most of our traditional economic indicators can't keep up with how fast the economy is changing. However, there are some indications that consumer confidence has dropped more than 20%. I put in a month, but it's really just in the last few weeks. The consensus among economists is that we could see gross domestic product drop as much as 20 to 30% in the second quarter. Now, the hope and what we're working towards very hard is trying to get that recovery to happen as quickly as possible in the third or fourth quarter, and that we'll be able to return back to what we were doing. And a big part of this is, like it says, a dramatic downturn requires a dramatic response, and that's what we've seen in the CARES Act. So just quickly, a few parts of the bill. Number one, support for workers and small businesses. It includes $349 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program. And Howard and Scott will be talking about that more. In addition, there's $10 billion. Think of, these are all billions with a B, not millions. $10 billion to expand the Economic Injury Disaster Program. That's an existing program that small businesses can use to that applies towards rebuilding the impacts of disasters. One important point is that small businesses cannot apply for both of those programs. They have to choose either the EIDL or the PPP programs. And then it also increases the maximum loan for an SBA Express loan, or the amount from an SBA Express loan, from $350,000 to $1 million. Support for individuals, and we've heard a little bit about this. $301 billion in direct payments to households. The federal government has committed that they want to get that money out as quickly as possible, possibly in the next few weeks. And so one of the recommendations is make sure that the federal government has your information so they can send either, well, the preferred method is direct deposit into your bank account. It will take much longer to send checks. And so make sure, even if you typically don't file a tax return, that you've done it for to get these monies from the federal government. Also, $250 billion in increased unemployment benefits. For instance, it extends the jobless benefits from 26 weeks to 39 weeks. It also gives an additional $600 per week for the first 4 months. It applies for traditional workers, but also contract workers, freelancers, and other non-traditional workers. And it is a dramatic increase from what we had in the past. Also, the CARES Act includes, allows participants to withdraw up to $100,000 without a 10% penalty. However, it is restricted to coronavirus-related purposes. It also allows loans up to $100,000 or 100% of the account balance for 401ks, again, specifically for expenses related to the virus. It also gives a number of different tax benefits for things like charitable giving, student loans, and then tax benefits to businesses to help them continue to retain their important employees. And then another part is assistance to owners and renters in terms of mortgage forbearance. For single family mortgages, it allows people to request 180-day forbearance on their mortgage payments, and then they can request additional time if they need it. Now, an important point there is forbearance is not loan forgiveness. That money will still need to be repaid. It's just if there's a dramatic situation, borrowers can work with their lenders to push off some of those payments for a further date. And also for owners of multifamily units, there's the opportunity to forbear for forbearance of some of that of those loan payments for up to 30 days, and then they can request additional ability to move that back. Looking at the healthcare system, there is a wide number of areas that the CARES Act is helping the healthcare system, about $150 billion in total, including purchasing medical supplies, specifically those critical supplies that we've been working so hard to get to our emergency responders, developing emergency drugs to fight the coronavirus, including the ultimate vaccine that will be distributed once we find that cure. It allows diagnostic testing. So this is the testing for to know if you have the coronavirus. It will be provided for free. And then expanding a number of different services to make sure that those in rural communities and hard to get areas have access to healthcare and to medical services. And then it additionally provides funding for Medicare and Medicaid that are much needed by providers. For instance, it eliminates mandatory budget cuts for Medicare and increases money going to state Medicaid programs. And then lastly, it provides supports for states and for severely distressed sectors of the economy. First off, with the states, it provides $150 billion directly to state and local governments. For the state of Utah, for instance, the state will be getting about $1.5 billion, and that will be divided between state and local governments, depending on their need to address the coronavirus. Then there's also a separate $500 billion program set up by the Department of Treasury, specifically targeting those areas that have been impacted by the coronavirus. It includes a combination of loans, but also it can include direct investments into companies that are having severe struggles. There are limitations on this. For instance, companies that receive it must maintain at least 90% of their current workforce or must get back to 90% of their current workforce. This is designed for a little bit larger companies, those larger than 500 employees. There are caps on the interest rates. No principal or interest will be due in the first 6 months of the loans. And we're still waiting on the guidance on that part, but we'll be getting that hopefully very soon from the Department of Treasury. There's also specific money going to some of these really hard-hit areas, specifically the airlines. $25 billion for passenger airlines, $4 billion for cargo airlines, and then other specific areas to help them. So what does this do to the economy? And that's one of the tough questions, because we're still even though it's been so dramatic, we're still in the early stages of this impact. Well, if you look at the total size of the CARES Act, it's over $2 trillion. That represents over 9% of US, it says gross domestic product. To put it in another way, annual income for the entire United States is about $900 million a month. So this essentially has the potential to completely replace the entire monthly income of the United States. So it is a dramatic bill. It is by far the largest stimulus package the country has ever passed. But the critical part of this is that it has to get out very, very quickly. One of the problems that we've seen in past stimulus packages is they've been too small and they've taken too long to get where it needs to go. And so the federal government's goal is to get the money out very quickly, very strategically to the areas that are hurting the most. If you think about the Paycheck Protection Program, that money is going to be coming out very quickly in the next week or two. Direct payments to households, again, Secretary Mnuchin stressed that they want to have that money out in 2 to 3 weeks. And then the unemployment benefits, the goal is to have that coming out in the next couple weeks, not months. In addition to, so what I've mostly focused on here is fiscal policy, but the government has also been very active in monetary policy as well. For instance, the Federal Reserve has dropped the federal funds rate down to 0 again, which is the lowest we've ever seen it. They are actively encouraging banks to lend and to work with the Fed. Another area that the Fed does, they do something called bond buying or quantitative easing. And over the last about 3 weeks, the Treasury has already purchased nearly $1 trillion in Treasury and mortgage-backed securities, or as committed to purchasing those. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, said, when it comes to this lending, we will not run out of ammunition. That just doesn't happen. So what's next? We are still getting the information from the Fed, from Treasury, and as we get that, we'll continue to be pushing that out and giving more information. We're also actively monitoring what kind of impact this is having. Is it having the goal? Is it enough, or is it directed in the right areas? And Congress and the President are already starting very early discussions of what would, if and when, and what would need to be in a fourth stimulus bill. The President has mentioned focusing on infrastructure potentially for the next one. Ultimately, this will be a critical time. Improving our economy needs to, and this is really the struggle, is as long as the spread of the virus isn't under control, it becomes really tough to get the economy going. And so that's why it's so important to continue the social distancing measures and the testing and everything that we've been doing in our economy. So that's it for me. Next we'll hear from Howard Headlee and Scott Simpson from the Utah Bankers Association and the Utah Credit Union Association.
Let's see, do I need to unmute myself? No. Robert, thank you. As you know, Utah is the 5th largest banking state in the country, and we have some of the best capitalized banks in the nation, and that's going to be a great benefit to our state and its citizens during this crisis. Utah's financial institutions are eager to help our local small businesses by quickly processing and approving loans through the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program, and that begins tomorrow. The SBA designed the program so that borrowers can go straight to their financial institutions. This way, the loan funding can be expedited. By helping to protect payrolls and jobs, the loan program recognizes the vital role that small businesses play as employers who really are the backbone of our economy. By helping to protect payrolls, we do that through the Paycheck Protection Program. And so who is eligible for this program? All businesses with 500 or fewer employees can apply. This includes sole proprietorships, self-employed individuals, independent contractors, 501c3 nonprofits, veterans organizations, and tribal businesses. Small businesses in the hospitality and the food industry business with more than one location, they get a little more flexibility on the 500 worker limitation. So how much can you borrow under this program? The loan program looks at your average monthly payroll and then takes 2.5 times that number as the maximum loan size, not to exceed a total of 10 million. So one thing you can do to prepare is to get your payroll information for the last 12 months pulled together. Because there aren't any of the normal underwriting criteria, we can get the application processed and get you the money fairly quickly. And to the extent that you use that money to pay your employees, pay your rent, and your utilities over the next 8 weeks, the loan will be forgiven. To the extent that a portion of the loan is not forgiven, it'll convert into an SBA 7A loan at 1% interest rate for 2 years, and the remaining payments can be deferred for up to 6 months. A lot of the details are still being worked out. In fact, I think that they just arrived in my email box. So we're anxious to take a look at those and be ready. But as I said, we'll begin processing applications as soon as tomorrow, according to the Treasury's press conference about half an hour ago. So we encourage businesses to reach out to their bank and their credit unions and start a discussion about this program. By helping businesses keep their employees paid, their rent paid, their utilities on, we'll be in a great position to get the economy growing again after the pandemic subsides. And that's important to all of us. So reach out to your bank or your credit union and get that process started. You can find a list of authorized lenders at utah.bank and utahcreditunions.org. Now I'm going to turn the time over to Scott Simpson, the president and CEO of the Utah Credit Union Association, to talk more about when you can apply and what you should prepare.
Thank you, Howard. I don't see myself, but that's okay. Nobody else should have to do that either.
We can hear you, and we can see you.
Okay, perfect. Just want to, first of all, if I could, this is give you a sense of the extraordinary nature of this effort. The fact that Howard Headlee and I are talking about the same thing from the same side of the table is significant, and grateful for the chance to do it. He and I have been playing this one-note piano of economic recovery for several weeks. Grateful for that. We're dealing with the same anticipation as all of the businesses as it relates to the Paycheck Protection Program loans. And there's good news. Tomorrow, Friday, April 3rd, the small business and sole proprietorships can apply to the program. Then next week, a week from tomorrow, April 10th, financial institutions will be able to accept loan applications from independent contractors and the self-employed. Additional details are forthcoming. Howard said that. We're trying to gather our way through ongoing releases from the Small Business Administration. But one thing that we do know is that payroll documentation is the primary financial information that we need, has been mentioned earlier. And so I'd like to just give a couple of tips on that if I could. To expedite that application process, we recommend that business owners begin to gather their payroll documentation for 2019 or newer businesses for the last 90 days. And let me give you an idea of what that should include. And as a side note, I've noticed that many of the popular payroll providers that are out there are already standing up automatic reporting mechanisms that you should pursue with your payroll provider. But you should include in this salary, wages, commission, tips. This is obviously capped at an annualized $100,000 per employee. But for every employee, you should include as benefits, vacation, parental, family, medical or sick leave, allowance for separation or dismissal, payment for group health, and care benefits, including insurance premiums and the payment of any retirement benefit, state and local taxes assessed on compensation, any entity documents like articles of incorporation or organization, bylaws, partnership agreements are all applicable and will be needed. We anticipate that these funds will go quickly. They're finite and in high demand, and we encourage you to gather these documents now. Be sure you're ready with everything so that you can send in your full application. We encourage you to reach out to your financial institution, your lender of relationship if you can, and other appropriate and approved SBA lenders as you can. We've seen, I think, the sample application from the SBA for the last 48 hours or so, and we ask you to reach out to your lenders for those applications, or you can actually find it on the Paycheck Protection site at SBA, a sample of it at the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program site. I'd now like to turn the time over to Zions Bank President and CEO Scott Anderson, who's also the chair of the Finance Committee of the Governor's Task Force, Coronavirus Task Force, for additional information. Scott.
System made up of banks and credit unions is strong, well capitalized, and working diligently to help individuals and businesses work through the challenges that they're facing as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Banks and credit unions are in overdrive helping customers and have been doing so since the earliest days of the crisis. And I want to emphasize too that there's no safer place to keep your money than in a credit union or in a bank. I'm grateful for the way the banking and credit union industry is now mobilizing to help small businesses with the payroll protection plan. These businesses are the backbone of our economy here in Utah. Their owners and employees are our friends and neighbors. And these loans will protect paychecks and provide stability for workers and for employers alike. In the coming weeks, another federal plan will kick into motion. Eligible individual taxpayers will begin receiving economic impact checks from the federal government. They will be distributed automatically by the Treasury Department and the Internal Revenue Service with no action required on our part. If you do not use direct deposit, the IRS and Treasury has said that it will develop an online portal in the coming weeks for individuals to provide their banking information so that they can receive their payments immediately instead of in the mail. But if you do receive your check by mail, Utah's banks and credit unions can help you there as well. And in most cases, you'll be able to cash your checks without any fees. For a list of participating banks and credit unions, visit utah.bank or utahscreditunions.org. Finally, I'd like to remind everyone to be hyper vigilant about fraud and scams at this time. Scammers may attempt to use our concerns related to the coronavirus to get personal information or to gain access to our accounts. Frauds can come through websites, phone calls, emails, and text messages. You should only provide information such as your social security number or your credit card number if you are the one initiating a phone call to your financial institution. Banks and credit unions will never ask clients for their personal information or log in credentials in an email or text message. We're looking out for you at this time, and we want you to look out for fraud. Thanks a lot. And I'll turn it back to you, Derek.
Thank you, Scott, and thanks to all the participants. We have had a few questions already come in, and we got some others that will come in from the press. So I'll just open this up to our panel. The first question is a very specific question, and it deals with if you have multiple entities that have different tax ID numbers but a common ownership. Should that be a separate application for a separate loan for every tax ID, or are we doing one for based on ownership? Any guidance from our panel on that question?
I would recommend that it should be, you can turn in a separate loan application for each separate business. And there are provisions in the plan that if you are a large corporation like a restaurant with many stores, but each store has less than 500 people, you can apply on an individual store basis instead of as a total franchise.
Scott, you referenced that this is a finite amount of money, and I'm sure all the businesses who will be applying will be thinking about that. What guidance, if any, have we heard if and when this initial amount of money runs out?
Well, I'm happy to address that, Derek. Congress would find, if this money runs out in a short amount of time, I think they're going to view that as a success story. And they've indicated that if that happens, they'll come back and look at appropriating more money for the program. But it is first come, first served. And so that's why we want to get on this call today and alert everybody that the program should open tomorrow.
Thank you for that information. The next question that we've received, Robert, this one would be for you because you mentioned that businesses would not be eligible to apply for both the disaster loan as well as the Paycheck Protection Program. And I just wanted to make sure that we heard that correctly. Can you confirm that that is the case?
Well, that's one of the issues between the law and the guidance. The guidance that we've received so far, and remember that this bill is less than a week old. Early indications that I've heard is that after March 31st, which we're now after March 31st, businesses had to choose between the Paycheck Protection Loan or the EIDL loan. Now, we may get additional information, and I'm also going to ask the other panelists if they've heard anything since that, but that was my understanding.
Robert,
Derek, I would also add that on the application for the payroll protection plan, you have to check a box that you have not applied for this loan from any other institution. So usually sometimes when we apply for mortgages, we apply or talk to several banks or several credit unions to see who would give us the best rate and who would get done the fastest. But for this loan, you can only apply to one institution and you have to check that off on the application.
And to the issue of the EIDL loan and this loan, it has been a lot of confusion because of the law and the guidance, and we're waiting for the guidance. I've looked at two different proposed applications that they put out and pulled back to see how they handle that issue. But even if you have an EIDL loan in process, you have the opportunity to convert it to the BPP loan, which is a much more generous program. So I think if you have an EIDL out there, you're going to probably want to convert it if you have to. We've also heard of that differentiation of saying, well, if you don't use it for the same purposes, that seems difficult to try to delineate, but if they create a way to do it, then potentially you could have both. That's not what I understand.
Another question that was asked was, what do you do in an instance where you may have seasonal employees? A comment was made from our panel about putting that payroll information together now.
We've been told that we will have the flexibility on seasonal workforce to go back in calculating the average monthly payroll to look at the comparable months last year, April and May, and even in June, if you do have an increase in that payroll in those months, and use that for the total loan amount. Again, haven't seen how that's going to play out in the actual application and the regs, but we've been told we'll have that flexibility.
We have a question from one of the members of the press who's joined us, and that's Jason Lee from the Deseret News. Jason, if you can unmute yourself, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, yeah, I was just trying to understand what, I guess I'm just going to see here. How many financial institutions locally, are there just going to be banks, just a few banks, or is it credit unions as well? Can you kind of expound on where small businesses might be able to apply for some of this money?
Well, if you go to Utah.bank, we have a list of all the participating banks, and most of the banks in Utah that lend to business are participating in this program. I haven't counted it up, but it's a pretty full screen. I know Scott has a similar resource.
Yeah, from a credit union perspective, not all credit unions are authorized SBA lenders. That list is expanding, but same thing, Jason, at utahscreditunions.org. We've got a list of those that have indicated the ability and willingness to participate in the PPP program. And then, as always, I think the first thing, and I think Howard would agree with this, is we encourage you to reach out to your financial institution you've got transactional relationship with or a lending relationship with. That sort of know your customer relationship should assist in moving it along much quicker.
Thank you.
Another question that's come in through the chat feature is, what do you do if your bank or your credit union is not an SBA approved lender? And where can you go to find one?
That's the same answer for the last question. You just go to utah.bank or utahcreditunions.org and you'll see a list of institutions.
Derek, Scott here, just chiming in, it might be helpful to have the task force put those links up on the business section, the small business section, deep in the coronavirus task force website as well.
And Derek, I see in the chat that people are talking about tomorrow as some kind of a deadline, and it's not a deadline. This process will be open up through the end of June as long as the money lasts. So tomorrow is just the beginning. So you haven't missed anything, but we're just starting tomorrow.
One other question that's come in from the public is, what if your business is in the startup phase? Are there different rules or are there different options for a startup company?
There's probably two things to think about there, Derek. Under this program, you have to be in business as of February 15th. So we could look at your payroll like in January, February, come up with an average monthly payroll. The other issue in the startup phase that could be an issue you have to work through is if you're primarily owned by a venture company. So let's say you're 50% or more owned by a venture company. There are affiliation rules. We talked about them a little bit earlier in terms of mutual ownership, but depending upon the ownership structure, the employee limit could apply to the whole venture firm. So that's something you'll have to work through with your financial institution, depending upon how your ownership is structured.
I want to thank again all of our panelists for joining us today on this very important topic. If you're a member of the media and had an additional question that you weren't able to answer, you can check the contact information on the media advisory that went out. If you're a member of the public who's joining the town hall and you had a specific question that was not addressed, you can go to the coronavirus.utah.gov website. There's a list of frequently asked questions there. If that still doesn't answer your question, there's also an email that you can send to a member of the rapid response team. In fact, let's use that as a segue into our next segment, where we will hear from Miles Hansen. Miles is the president and CEO of the World Trade Center Utah. He's also leading the working group for the economic task force dealing specifically with the federal stimulus programs. And he's also this week been working hard with his team to stand up this rapid response group. So Miles, we want to give you some time to talk about how that group is working and how people can get the technical assistance that they need to navigate through this process. Miles, are you with us?
I am. Thank you, Derek, for that introduction and for all the work that you're doing to lead the task force. You know, just this morning, I thought of a quote that all of us are very familiar with. President Reagan famously said, "The most terrifying words in the English language are, 'I'm from the government and I'm here to help.'" And what all of us are working to do on the task force is right now, the government is doing these very big, significant things directly to help small businesses and individuals across the state of Utah. So as a task force, what we're trying to do is to build the tools and provide the support to small businesses so that we can help you get help from the government. And we've done that in a few different ways. And Derek, you talked about the rapid response team. So I'll spend a minute explaining what that is, because it's a pretty cool, unique Utah story. So we all know that SBA has been overwhelmed with a tsunami of requests and emails and phone calls over the past week or so, as Utah companies are trying to get details on the Paycheck Protection Program, the economic injury disaster loans, and other assistance that the stimulus package has made possible for Utah businesses, and they were unable to keep up with everything. Late last week, we recognized that this would be a major obstacle that would prevent Utah companies from getting the access to the information they need and the assistance that they need to go and participate in these programs. And so we put out a call for volunteers for a rapid response team. You know, overnight, we were overwhelmed with people from many different organizations who volunteered to be a part of a team. And what we did is we've developed some processes that sit behind the SBA. And we've trained up these team members to respond to emails and phone calls, general inquiries, to make sure we're getting companies information they need and we're helping to solve the challenges they're facing. And we stood up the team, trained them on Tuesday, went live yesterday. And at this point, the team has responded to hundreds of requests from Utah companies to help get them where they need to go. And so for anybody watching today, I see the chat box there's lots of questions that we're not going to have time to answer. And so I want to make sure that everybody knows how they can engage with the rapid response team. If you go to coronavirus.utah.gov/business, right towards the top there, you'll see a federal resource link. Click that link. The first thing you'll see is a box where you can click to request assistance from the rapid response team. Click the button, fill it out, write down what your question is, what type of assistance you need, and then a member of the team will get that. They'll follow up with you, and then they'll get you information right away if it's something that they have on the tip of their fingers and they can answer that question. If not, they have the resources that they need to go out to different partners here in the state, but also in the federal government to dig a little deeper and get some answers for you. Also on that website is all the information that you will need for these federal programs and resources. We've talked today about the SBA programs. There are many other programs as well. There are tax elements to the stimulus program that Robert touched on. You can find details and links to worksheets on that same website as you continue down in that federal resource section. And for instance, the question about whether or not a company can apply for both the PPP program and the EIDL program, Robert was exactly right. A few days ago, the answer was no. That has been updated. And so it's important that people continue to look at the information. The latest guidance that we've seen, and Howard touched on this a little bit, is that you can apply for both the PPP program as well as the EIDL program. And as long as you're not using the economic injury disaster loan to cover payroll, rent, and utilities, you can still get that loan to cover other expenses. That one is more open-ended. There's not the forgiveness element, but it is up to $2 million. And so we encourage companies, if they're looking to maximize the amount of support they can get at this time, that they can take a look at both of those programs. The third thing I'll touch on very quickly that we've been working on very hard as part of this federal committee is to troubleshoot problems for Utah companies. Just today, there was that question about venture capital and private equity-backed companies. I talked to the CEO of one company here in Utah. They employ 300 people, phenomenal company. Their revenue is going to be down 80 to 90% in April and May. That's exactly the kind of company that Congress and the administration want to support. But because the way they define these affiliation rules, right now this Utah company won't qualify. So we've been in touch with Senator Romney's team throughout today. They're working on it. And so we're hoping to see some updates to the rules in the coming days that would allow these types of companies to participate. And so for any Utah companies, if you are running into brick walls and there just seems to be, mistakes in these regulations and rules as they come out, please let us know, because we will engage with our congressional delegation. We're in very regular contact with everybody on the congressional delegation to help identify those problems, find the right solutions in Washington, D.C., and then connect some dots and at the very least, make sure that the members of our congressional delegation are all speaking in a unified voice on some of these issues that are critical for Utah companies. So with that overview, Derek, I'll kick it back over to you.
Thank you, Miles. And thank you also for providing that additional clarification that some of our participants have asked, as the question specifically as to if they can apply for both programs. And I want to confirm what I think I heard you say, which is that they can, but not for the same purpose. In other words, they can't get money from both programs to pay their employees. It's going to be one or the other, but they could apply for one and use it for one purpose. They could apply for another and use it for a second purpose. Did I understand that correctly?
Yep, that's correct. That's the latest guidance that we've received and looked into is, and Howard mentioned that it's hard in the application process to really get into details about exactly what the loan will be used for. My guess is we'll get additional clarification over the coming days. But as it stands right now, yes, you can go ahead and I would focus first on the PPP loan if you're doing one, sequentially. But the EIDL loans, they're competitive rates, 3.75%. No personal guarantee required for loans less than $200,000. It can be a significant additional source for financial support beyond what the PPP is designed to do, which is to cover those fixed expenses over the course of the next 8 weeks.
Thank you. I received a tough question from one of our participants, but I know you've got good answers, Miles, so I'm going to hit you with this one. The question related to an understanding that we all have that this third round of stimulus, particularly the Paycheck Protection Program element, the $350 billion that's been made available and that could be forgiven if it's used to pay for payroll. And the question was, if I have a business, but the nature of my business is such that I don't have any work for my employees, should I keep them on the payroll, get the loan, and continue to pay them? What are your thoughts about that? That's kind of an interesting question, and maybe any of our other panelists would like to weigh in. Go ahead. I see you raising your hand.
Derek, that's kind of the purpose of the program. That's exactly why they're doing it. They want to avoid this massive migration off of payrolls where people are getting health benefits and other things and moving over to the unemployment rolls. And so the answer to that is yes, keep your employees intact. We want your business to be able to simply reopen. We don't want you to have to rebuild it. Rebuilding is going to take a lot longer for our economy. We want people to be in a position to just be able to reopen, keep your workforce intact, keep their lives stable with their health insurance and all those things. So that's exactly what we're talking about. One detail that we haven't covered that I think we should just put out there, all of this applies to wages, salaries under $100,000. So salaries over $100,000, that portion over $100,000 is not going to count into that average monthly amount and is not going to be forgiven on the back end.
Very important information, and thank you for sharing that. It just goes to the point that this is to help the people, to help the small businesses that need it most. Miles, I want to give you just a couple minutes to remind us all about the rapid response team that you've put together and how people can access that resource.
Great, thanks, Derek. Again, for anybody who is calling the SBA here in Utah or sending emails to the SBA, those are automatically behind the scenes being routed to the rapid response team. You'll get responses there. For anybody who wants to engage us directly, go to coronavirus.utah.gov/business, click on the federal resource link. That then will take you, it'll jump down halfway down the page. You will see right there a box where you can click to submit a request for assistance. You fill out the form, you type in what your question or what type of assistance you need, and then a member of the team will get that and they'll respond right away and get you the information you need. And we want to design it so that there can be some back and forth between companies and the people responding. And so we can make sure we're again, making those words that President Reagan talked about a little less terrifying, that we can hold your hand and hold companies' hands through this process because it is complicated. There are a lot of nuanced rules and it's changing. And so it is something that's going to take a little bit of time for companies. But as Howard and Scott and the others have pointed out, this is really an unprecedented program, and we want as many Utah businesses as possible to benefit from it.
Terrific. Thank you, Miles. For the last 10 minutes that we have for our town hall today, I want to turn the time to Bill Crim, who is leading the United Way of Salt Lake. He has some important information on the 211 resources that exist. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Derek, thank you so much for letting us share this information with people. I'd love to be able to share my screen if the host could make that possible, and let folks on this town hall know about a resource that most of us don't have to think about. But right now in this moment, tens of thousands of Utahns and many more will find themselves wondering how to find help in a very complicated and diffuse system of social services and government services throughout the state. 211 is a resource established by the United Ways of Utah that is available by calling the number 211. Sorry, let's get this going. I think that works. So you should be able to see.
We see that, Bill. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. An example of the kinds of resources that are in our resource database statewide. There are 10,000 of these resources that cover everything from emergency shelter and food to housing and rental assistance, where to find healthcare. Again, in this moment where so many people are finding themselves without income, despite the great programs that we just heard about, and hopefully those will reduce a lot of the need. But we know there are a lot of Utahns who have never tried to navigate these systems before, and 211 is there for people as a simple phone number to call and find in their own zip code where to find help. There's this incredible resource of trained information specialists, we call them, on our team, who can pinpoint what the needs are, where to find those resources. You can see from the data on this slide that just in the last several weeks, the percentage of calls has started to increase substantially, is up over 30% in terms of Utahns looking for help. And the way to find this information is not only on 211 by phone, pardon me, but by, also on the web at 211.utah.org. You can download an app to your phone. You can text to 898-211, and we'll have people who can follow up and find out what those needs are, and again, direct people to the help they need. This help can be provided in over 200 different languages. And we wanted the business community to know about this resource. We wanted to be available to those who might not have thought that they would be in need, to know that there's an easy way to find those needs, and really appreciate this moment to share that with you. It's also true, we've learned from our board of directors, which is comprised of about 50 business leaders, that there are many businesses who, while challenged in this moment, they also find themselves wondering how they can help. And I do want to take a minute to point out that for those who do find themselves in a position to help Utahns connect with needs or to meet unmet needs, there's a lot of work going on right now through our Promise partnership to identify specific needs. Imagine being a refugee in this moment with kids in school, trying to figure out how to navigate a world where you need wireless internet and a computer to access education for your kids. Imagine being an essential worker in a grocery store or the healthcare environment who doesn't have access to childcare. These needs are are growing as well. And again, 211 is a resource for those who need them. And as we work to build the infrastructure of our community to meet those needs, we do want to provide an opportunity for folks who have the ability to connect and partner in resolving these needs, a chance to do that. All of this information will be on our website at uw.org. You can find, again, 211 information for those in need and ways to help if you find yourself in a position to do that. Derek, thank you so much.
Bill, thank you for that information. It's a important reminder, and we always, as an economic task force, need to remind ourselves that what we're talking about is people here, and your information about immigrants, about refugees, about the unique challenges that they're facing in this environment is timely and needful. So thank you for that. And thanks for all the work that the United Way is doing in that and on many other fronts. This concludes our town hall of the task force. A reminder that we do these each Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. It's a standing time. The landscape is changing quickly and information is going fast. So this is the best way for you in the business community and the community at large to get the latest on what's happening with regards to the Economic Response Task Force. We want to remind you of two things. First of all, always go to coronavirus.utah.gov for the latest information. All the resources that you heard about today are available at coronavirus.utah.gov at the business section. And also to let you know, a preview for our town hall next Tuesday at 4, we'll have Senator Mitt Romney, who will be on talking about a possible 4th round of federal stimulus. We'll look forward to joining with you then. Thanks again.